Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I am your host, Jacob Shorba. It has been a long time since we've been live on here. I think the last time we were on here was the Antonio Johnson pick. We streamed live after that because everyone was super excited. So it has been a while. And with that, we may not have a lot of people in here tonight, but regardless, the goal here is to allow you guys to ask questions, to talk. We just want to talk about Jags football. We all love it. And the focus is going to be on the offseason, the future for this team, some of the storylines to watch the rest of the season, and just kind of what the team needs to do at this point with some of the players and the way things are trending. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and throw them at me. We'll discuss really anything, but I'll probably give it a couple minutes for people to come in here too, so we won't get too deep into things. Now, we'll go ahead and swap over to our screen here so you guys can take a look at what we're going to be going through tonight. So, we're kind of going to take a look at some of the contract situations with players, primarily for 2024, obviously, because, well, 23 is already decided. What players could earn, just looking at performances on PFF, some of that information, kind of what contracts could look like, what people are getting paid, free agents for next year. We're going to note this as well as a very important thing to discuss about the Calvin Ridley trade compensation. And then if we get time at the end, we might do a mock draft over here, show you guys maybe what it would look like to trade around, some of the possibilities for Jacksonville. Look at the big board and look at some college players on PFF. So that's our plan for tonight. So I'll keep checking on the chat here. If you guys got anything, do my best with that. I might pull this up on my phone for that sake. 1 second. All right, there we go. Alright, we will start off by talking about some of the contract situations. If you guys got anything, throw it out there. We'll kind of shift gears. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the players this season and what we could look for in the future. So, there are a lot of opportunities for Jacksonville this next offseason to save some money. I think there's going to be a lot of hard decisions. Some that may have been easier a couple months ago, but the dynamic has kind of changed. I think one of the first examples of that we could talk about is probably the Cam Robinson contract, because if we're looking at this from a standpoint where we're not really considering health completely, Cam Robinson seems like a very expendable player because you got Walker Little on this team. He's played really well for Jacksonville. I know the only gripe really this year was him stepping on Trevor's ankle, which was awful, but also just kind of a freak circumstance thing, even though it has happened twice. Doesn't look that great for him, but I don't think that's something you can really evaluate him off of. And he's still got one more year on this team before he starts on that second contract. We can see what he's going to earn. It's only $2.5 million on the season. So that's a contract that is obviously going to be a lot less expensive than what Cam Robinson's is. And what we have to consider when we're looking at these numbers, your cap number is going to involve the dead money. So this would be money that you've pushed down the road, maybe from a signing bonus, which is what it is in this example. And you also have the cap hit for that season, what that player is going to earn that year. So for Cam Robinson, he is going to earn for that season this number plus this number, so $17.75 million. And that's the money that you can save because that's optional at this point. It's not guaranteed. And so ultimately, if you decide to move on from him, you're saving a lot of money. But the question now is, can you comfortably do that and expect to have a good player at left tackle all season? And what we mean by that is that we have had injuries this season at left tackle pretty bad. Cam Robinson was out first 4 weeks because of the suspension. Walker Little lasted that time. Pretty much the second Cam Robinson took the field in week 5, he was immediately hurt. And or Walker Little was, my bad. And Walker Little was out for a little while. The team was forced to start another player at left guard. I believe it was Tyler Shatley. I cannot recall exactly. But once Walker Little started to get back into the lineup and they traded for Ezra Cleveland, it wasn't long after that we saw Cam Robinson go down. And now he's not going to be back until the playoffs. So not a great situation at all there. And then you got Walker Little with a seemingly lingering injury. I don't know if it was the exact same, but he just keeps getting banged up pretty much every month. And then even Ezra Cleveland went down in the game against Cleveland. That was a huge problem for Jacksonville, just to give you an idea of how bad it was after they lost Ezra Cleveland, who's not even been a tackle in the NFL until Sunday. Blake Hance had to fill in. He's guard for this team. If you watched anything this last offseason, we used him as our placeholder for Calvin Ridley a ton because this is the guy that we knew basically nothing about, and he's not a huge part of the team. He posted the first 0 I have ever seen from a player on PFF. It's absolutely crazy. But hey, this is a guard going up against Myles Garrett, so that's going to happen. But it raises the question of whether or not you can move on from Cam Robinson. And so it's a very intriguing choice now, because before we would have said, well, try to trade him, release him if you need to. Like, this is a clear opportunity to save money because you have a really good player behind him who's just about as good as Cam. And now all of a sudden, you don't even have both those guys healthy. And so you have to ask the question, is it going to be way worse if you only have one of them next year? And then you got to rely on Ezra Cleveland to move out, and he hasn't played tackle for 4 years. And so it becomes a problem, and I think there has to be a conversation there. And that's one of the reasons why I think this team really needs to look into the idea of drafting another tackle. I think it doesn't have to be necessarily super early in the draft, but it's something that they do need to focus on and to give some thought. So if there's a guy sitting there, maybe in like round 2, you consider taking him. Because if we go back and say, would we regret the Walker Little pick at this point? Probably not. So I think realistically for this team and needing to save some cap and try to prepare for the future, I would still move on from him, but I would definitely be looking to find a new backup tackle and someone that could just be the swing guy and not have to pull out of another position on the offensive line and potentially cost your team a pretty good lineup. So that's probably my thoughts on him. And once again, for everyone who's joining throughout this, if you guys got any questions, any topics you want to talk about, throw them at me. We will discuss it. We have no specific guidelines for what we're going through exactly, just kind of talking in general, so it can really be about anything. I'll be checking the chat as this goes on. So I'd probably start by releasing him. I don't know if you're able to get trade compensation, because although I would say he's a good starting left tackle. Like, he's done fine, and you can say that he's improved every year as a blocker, especially as a pass blocker, which is what teams care about more. Look at his grades for this year. This is the best he's done with that. Although, notice run blocking hasn't been as great. But consider a guy like Jawan Taylor, who he doesn't have really the injury issues that Cam Robinson has had, but he was on the right side, which is not as valuable. He posted similar numbers to this, where it was really good pass blocking grades, struggled as a run blocker. In fact, I think Jawan last year had the most negatively graded run blocks in the NFL out of every tackle in the league. So it gives you an idea of where he was. And he ended up getting a huge contract in free agency. Like, teams will value these kinds of players. You can even take into account the fact that we signed Brandon Scherf despite a long list of injuries that he's gone throughout his career. And it's actually worked out pretty well, because I don't know if he's actually like missed a whole lot of games since he's been here. He's had injuries here and there, but it's not really stuff that has kept him off the field for more than maybe a game or two, if that. Just parts of the game more so. So I think Cam, you could possibly trade him, but we give it the benefit of the doubt, or maybe the opposite of that, to where we just assume we're not going to get that. And if they were to actually do this, we'd hope that maybe you get some kind of draft capital for it. Now, talking about these other guys, I think you got some obvious choices here, right? Because Darius Williams, he's going to stick around. He's had a phenomenal year at cornerback. There's been moments where it hasn't been great, but overall, fantastic season. Guy you should probably make the Pro Bowl this year. He was the best corner in the league for the first half of the season, arguably. And Christian Kirk, I don't have to make the conversation about it anyway, because he's a great player. You see the impact he has just from him not being on the field now, even with a really good backup in Parker Washington. And I think that's a very interesting situation, because as much as we have complained about wide receiver the last few weeks, and especially this week, just having questions about whether the boundary guys are really going to be here past this year, because there's questions about Zay Jones, there's questions about Calvin Ridley. It's funny that's all happening, and we have these problems with the wide receiver room because we arguably have the best situation in the slot in the NFL, because you got one of the best slot receivers in Christian Kirk. I think top 3, because the guys I would consider potentially above him will be like Cooper Kupp and Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I think Christian Kirk is at least 3. And then you got Parker Washington, who was a really sneaky pick, and I think could be a good starter in the NFL. And so you have that guy behind that really helps out. So it's interesting that's the case. But there's going to be a conversation at receiver this offseason, and I have a really hard time imagining the Jaguars running it back with this exact same group, just with how poor it's gone. I mean, you look at the game on Sunday, and every single interception was at least partly due to one of the receivers running the wrong route. I mean, they didn't even know when the ball was coming their way or where they were supposed to be. It's pretty bad. So there's going to be a conversation there. Now, Brandon Scherff, this is one that the grades look great. Generally, the media and NFL analysts really like the way he's played. And he's generally considered one of the best guards in the NFL. But there's been some cases during the games where we see plays where it just does not look that good. And honestly, part of that I would attribute to the fact that he's playing next to Luke Fortner, who has not had that great of a season so far. And I don't think he's the future at center. I think, honestly, after this year, you have to move on from him, because you don't really see where it's going to get better for him. There's a clear deficiency with his strength, with his ability to hold blocks, and he gets mauled. Every single time that he's out blocking in the run game, he's getting destroyed. We can look at his grades. I mean, it's bad in about every aspect. It's even worse for run blocking. You see good pass blocking grades part of the season. It's gone down recently again. But a clear issue with this team has been the interior run blocking. And I think this is the biggest reason why, has been his performance. You see the size, great height, but 307 pounds doesn't even meet the threshold that Jacksonville has for agile interior offensive linemen. They're usually running around 315. He doesn't even meet that. He's about the lowest you get as far as size for offensive linemen, and he has a tall frame, so it's just not a good combination of things. And 6'6" center's pretty freaking tall. So Luke Fortner, I think, has been a big factor in this, and why maybe Brandon Scherff hasn't been the greatest at all times, and why we see some of those bad plays, because he's got to pick up extra blocks a lot of the time because Fortner's just blowing him. And so I think Scherff is a guy I would keep, not only because I do think he's played really well for Jacksonville, but this is a guy who's probably going to be retiring here soon. You can plan for the future there. You can plan for the guy you're going to bring in. And you need a leadership role on this team filled by someone who's a veteran on the offensive line. And if you're moving on from Scherf and you're moving on from Cam Robinson, we're talking about Walker Little, rookie contract, Ezra Cleveland, if he gets re-signed, just in a second contract. The center is going to be a rookie. The right guard is going to be maybe Cooper Hodges, who's a second year at that point, but hasn't played a regular season game, or you're drafting. And the right tackle is a second year guy. So you need some kind of veteran leadership. I think that makes sense to get with Brandon Scherf. And so he'd be a guy I'd keep around. Now, it's pretty simple with a lot of these. Like, obviously, we're not going to talk about Lawrence, Luakon, Walker. But then you get down to some of the guys I think I would let go. Fadakasi would be one. Although I do think I would be willing to change my mind if he's able to be healthy for the rest of the season. Because there's a big need on the interior of the defensive line. And he has done pretty well for Jacksonville when he's been in. You look at some of his grades, it's respectable. It's not the greatest. But he's had some good games. And he's clearly been a better player for the later part of this year. Problem is, he's consistently injured. And so you got to ask yourself, can you rely on that kind of player? It's the same thing we talked about on the offensive line, where you could consider the possibility of having a completely different left tackle in a couple years, just because you don't know if you can rely on the guys who are here right now. And so I would like to see Fadakasi stay healthy rest of the year. He has played in most of the games, but he's been out for significant portions of them. He's had lingering issues with injuries, and so those are things I really want to see with him. Just him be able to take a lot of snaps and stay in the games consistently. But right now, I think, assuming he still has some injury issues, I would probably be resetting things on the interior of the defensive line. And you got to hope that Devon Hamilton is doing better next year. I don't know if we're going to get him at 100% this season, but we'll have to see for him. Because, man, you just signed him to a big contract, $10 million a year. It's pretty bad timing. But Roy Robertson-Harris, another guy you re-signed. And then Zay Jones and Rayshon Jenkins will be two we kind of stake on here and talk about. Once again, guys, you got any questions, shoot them in. Haven't heard anything yet, but if you guys got anything, we'll kind of shift gears and focus on that. But Zay Jones, we'll take a look at what he's done. Focus on receiving. So this season, Zay has participated in 7 games for Jacksonville. He's had some good performances, 2 of them so far of 7. But he's also had some games that have been pretty bad this year. So probably the biggest example would be last Sunday against Cleveland. He ended up having ultimately 14 targets, caught only 5 catches for 29 yards. For that amount of targets, you have to have way more production, because we're talking about an average of 2 yards every time he's targeted. That's not going to get you anywhere. It's not having an impact. And this was a guy last year that was very reliable for Jacksonville. He ended up over the year, you can see down here, this includes playoffs, he had 980 yards. He was the guy who could make the crazy sideline catches, bring it down the end zone. And you lost your other person who could do that in Marvin Jones. And so I think they've really been missing that this year. And it's made it hard to convert in the red zone because you don't have this interior blocking. You can't put the ball up the middle. You can't run outside because defenses know you're going to try to do that. They swarm to that. And you haven't really had the guys in the end zone who can come down with it. We saw in like week 2, for example. I think both of these targets that he didn't bring in were actually, hold up. No, talking about KC. Okay, 6 targets, 0 receptions. He could not bring down a single catch in that game. We remember watching that. It was like every time Lawrence went to the end zone, they would be 1 foot out just by the smallest margin. And so you hate to see that with Zay Jones. And I think you got to have a conversation about what can he do for this team now? Because so far, it's not been a good year. Even off the field, we've had issues. And thankfully, they seem to be smaller than what we originally thought. And I won't speculate on that, but a lot of concerns with him going forward. And nice to see a doorman like. It has been a long time. The last time we streamed was on the 29th of April. I only know that because it was the third day of the draft, and it was when they got Antonio Johnson. So we were talking about that because it's like getting a second-round pick, basically, was where he was supposed to go. But yeah, I'll answer your question. So who is your top centers, and where would you like to pick them? So we'll take a look at the big board that I've got. And I want to just say, before we go through all this, there are, I believe, 170 players that I've scouted. And even with about 50 hours of time probably going into the big board and a little more looking at certain prospects, you got to consider the amount of time that is per prospect is still not a whole lot. And so there's going to be some guys you might not like where they are. You might not like the strengths and weaknesses, but this is just my introduction of them. And we'll kind of break them down a little more. So looking at offensive line. Top guy for center, I think, is Graham Barton. And Graham Barton is a tackle right now. That's where he's been playing. But if you look at his history in college, I believe he spent his first season at center. You can go back and see this. Actually, I think there's an easier way. Go down to the bottom here. Nope, doesn't show. Okay. 2020. Yep, CC position center. This was where he played coming in to college. He only played 6 games there, but every single snap was at center. And then he moved out to left tackle, which, this is something we see with offensive linemen in college where they will play in spots that they may not be built for necessarily. And so for Barton, it's kind of similar to Skoronski last year, where there's concerns with his arm length. Can he play outside? Because he's not going to have that great leverage. He is a really fun prospect to watch if you look into these guys. You will see him consistently going for the kill every single play. He is trying to bury guys. Sometimes doesn't end well, though. Sometimes he gets down on the ground. But you can see some of the strengths and weaknesses we put here. He is a really good fit for Jacksonville because he's a guy who can move around really well. He's also really strong, so a lot of the weaknesses we get in prospects coming here usually are around strength because you need quicker guys, and quicker guys usually aren't the heavier ones. So Graham Barton does a really good job of fitting the strength and agility profile. And so some of the notes, great frame, quick movement. He gets moving in the run game. He'll get out to the second level. He is a great pole blocker, searching for work, mauler mentality, and like I said, he tries to pile drive people consistently. But then you get the problems where he could be susceptible to different moves because he's so focused on putting all his leverage on a guy trying to put him into the ground. So he's got to be kind of careful about that. The arm length, like we mentioned, you're not going to worry about sealing the edge if he goes inside, but that was one thing I noticed too. Other guys that we could talk about, Jackson Powers Johnson is right there for me with Cedric Van Pran at center. Now, on here, I don't have Van Pran as high. They'll probably get moved. Some of these guys are kind of susceptible to that right now. But both these guys are really good centers and have some really fantastic stats this year. I think Jackson Powers Johnson is probably a little bit better of a fit. And ultimately, one of the cool things about him is he's actually named after Jacksonville. I don't believe he was born here, but his parents were living in the region. And so that's where he got his name from. But Jackson Powers Johnson, he would be a really good guy for day 2. Barton, we're probably talking about where the Jaguars pick first round. I'm not too comfortable with that because I think you can get some really good guys later in the draft. So we're probably talking second round here, but you can see some of the measurables. Like for center, 6'3", solid, that'll work. You get 320 pounds. And then you got really good pass blocking grades. You can see all the pressure stats. He's allowed 1 hurry and 1 pressure all season long. And it was the same play. Fantastic center. And you see he's done this over multiple years as well. Now, Cedric Van Pran, maybe more of a refined player in some ways, but you see a lot of the same stats. He is a little bit leaner. So I'd like to see him bulk up a little bit because we're kind of getting into the Luke Fortner numbers. But kind of the same thing here. More hurries and more pressures, but no sacks allowed. And ultimately, that is the most important thing of all this. Now, you'll see as well, 5 penalties on Cedric Van Pran. I believe Jackson Powers Johnson had a lot, so 9 on the season. So that is one thing he'll have to work out. But he is very much a guy who likes to put people into the ground. I would love to have him in Jacksonville. He'd be a really good pick, but one of those 3 guys would be best. Now, we got RM Skip in here. Trying not to talk all draft, but since you were on it, let's see. Would you draft O-line or D-line first, and why? Going O-line guard, being T-Law is our investment. Yeah, so for me, I would focus on offensive line in the draft. That would be where I'd go. Because I think defensive line would be a position where you're better off getting veteran talent if you can, and I think you can get some impact players like early day 3. Whereas if you wait too long with offensive line, such as a guard, you might not have someone available in day 3 that's going to do a really good job for you. And so I would be focused personally, like where I would go in the draft, I'm looking at receiver first round. I'm specifically looking if there's an opportunity to trade up in the teens, because there's some teams right now situated there that would probably not take the position. So you have a few you can call. And then I would be looking at a guy like Jackson Powers Johnson, who actually could play guard as well. Another person you could look at that might fall, this might be a sneaky name, Cooper Beebe. Now, honestly, Beebe should go in either the late first round or the early second. He is a really good football player, but the thing with him is that he's not really flashy. And we know how NFL teams are. They want to see these guys do this incredible stuff at the combine, and they'll go pick him. I mean, why did we pick Trayvon Walker? Because he did all this cool stuff, right? Not because he had a ton of sacks in college. Teams get addicted to that. And Beebe is just not going to offer that. He'll probably lose some of his stock from the combine, I would imagine. Here, let me get Discord here real quick. There we go. But I think Beebe could be someone who might fall to like late day 2, early day 3. You could go pick him up. Troy Fatanu would be a really good one as well. Although I'm not comfortable picking him in the first round, which is where he's probably going to go. I think it's a bit too rich. Originally, he was thought of more as like a day 2 guy, late day 2. And I was higher on him. I thought, hey, this guy should go second round, probably early on in the second round even. And now he's, all the way up in the first round. So sometimes that happens with players. Last year it was Devon Witherspoon. Loved him in the second round. He went 5th in the draft. So that kind of stuff happens. Now, other guards, Barden, same thing there. He can move out to guard. And then I would probably consider Christian Haynes and Tate Ratledge. Those would be the 2 other guys. Haynes I don't have super high because it's been hard to find film on him. For some reason, Connecticut just does not have a whole lot of film on their team. It's the same with Kyron Amagaji from Yale because, Yale's not really known for football. And so he probably should be a bit higher, but I just have not got to watch him as much. The thing with Haynes and why a lot of people I think are high on him is because he has some incredible grades on PFF. So you see over the whole year, he did allow a sack week 1. He's played right guard, has an 88 pass blocking grade and an 84 run blocking grade. Like, incredible stuff. He's played right guard, which is great too, because you ideally would like to get someone who can take over at the right guard spot in the future. Because I think next year you're probably looking at Ezra Cleveland returning, and then you're looking at having Brandon Scherf out at right guard for the team. So that would be one guy. And then Tate Ratledge has been a pretty good blocker as well. He's posted some good grades. I have not got to watch as much film on him, but he would be someone I would definitely consider as well. Same thing, right guard. Has not allowed a sack this year. A lot of guys in that range. But I'm looking day 2 for offensive line, and I would not be against the idea of doubling up on that position in the 2nd or 3rd round, depending on what picks we have. If you guys got any more questions, go ahead and throw them my way. I'm trying to make sure the stream hasn't died here. Just saw the numbers went a little wonky. I know when I did this previously, it like cut out randomly, so if you guys can see it, let me know. That'd be great. We'll go back over here until we get some more questions. So Zay Jones right now, if nothing changes, probably walking on his contract. He saved $4.5 million this year. Next season, it's $3.5 million. So he is a guy I'd probably walk on from. And I think Rayshawn Jenkins is someone Jacksonville could look to move on from as well, because he's going to cost the team ultimately, I think, around $10 million over the next 2 years. The 1-year salary cap hit is split up over both seasons, and that's something you can easily replace. I think Antonio Johnson's someone you consider to move out to safety, but there does need to be the conversation of, is he a better slot corner? Because it's what he's been known for since he played in college. He had the best grades of any slot corner. He plays the game really well. And the incredible thing with him is how good he's already started in the NFL. So, I mean, we saw, if you watched the last game, he immediately had an impact. Second he's on the field. Forced a fumble on a sack. Ended up getting a recovery for Jacksonville. Is a huge deal for the team. Made a huge impact, kind of got Jacksonville back in it. Unfortunately, we didn't finish, but he has done a phenomenal job this year. You look at his grades, he's an 87 on the season. I don't know many rookies that get that high, but keep in mind 53 snaps on the year. So it's not a big sample size. He's likely to struggle at some point, but it's a really good start. And I think he's a player you have to have in the starting lineup at least by the beginning of next year. So a place I would consider him is at safety. And even if you don't put him at safety, I think you can draft someone that can have a good impact, and you save some money here and you free up cap space so you can go make a run at some other players, because there's some needs for this team. And then obviously, you got some players you got to re-sign. This is kind of the end of who we'll cut, but we'll look at some of the contracts for these guys. So talk about Ezra Cleveland first, since he's top of the list. Haven't seen a whole lot of Ezra Cleveland. Now, his grades have gone down since he came to Jacksonville, obviously, because he's not been in the system for that long. Played out left tackle this last game, got hurt. Did a really good job for playing against Myles Garrett at a position you haven't played in 4 years. You know, we're not going to hit him too hard on that. But generally, want to see him do a little better on the team. But we've seen some big moments from him. He has been pretty reliable. There's just 1 sack on him during his time here. But I think he's someone that you look to bring back. And we look at some contracts that you could probably compare him with. And keep in mind, this is a player that, as much as I like him, you know, because I wanted him to get to Jacksonville. I wanted them to trade for him. He ended up coming here. It was really lucky as far as wanting a player, because it usually does not happen. Ezra Cleveland was essentially benched in Minnesota. They thought Dalton Risner was better and moved on from him, so I don't know how much leverage he has for that. And then he has to blow the socks off of the staff if he's going to get a big contract. So I think you're probably looking at him getting something in the range of like what Connor Williams has here, or Isaac Sumalo, maybe just over that. So we're probably talking maybe, say, $9 million. 3-year contract's pretty standard for Jacksonville. And the way they usually set these up, essentially, you have your base salary, which you put the bare minimum there. Your signing bonus gets split over all the seasons. That's what they're paid immediately. So your signing bonus plus the first year's salary is your average per year. So you take basically $9 million minus the base salary. So this is the number you get. And then base salary goes up to $9 million each of these years. This is pretty standard for how Jacksonville does their contracts. So that'd be Ezra Cleveland. Now, Josh Allen is a crazy one, because he's going to get a crap ton of money, and he has a lot of leverage on this team. Because I'll tell you this, if Josh Allen is not back with the Jaguars next year, they are not winning a Super Bowl. There is no way in the world. They would have to have the greatest offseason ever to win a Super Bowl without Josh Allen. That is their leader on defense. That is their best player on defense by miles. That is a guy they have to keep. Now, Nick Bosa, same draft class. He got his extension before the season, or I think during the first week. He got a massive $34 million a year. And then you look at another player who got an extension this year, Montez Sweat. Now, I will tell you, this will probably not be a contract that everything's based off of. I'm sure the players will try to use it, but this is an absurd amount of money for a player. I thought when Montez was hitting the market, he might be a guy that you'd pay like, I don't know, maybe $16 million a year. He blew that out of the water. Not even close. But I think realistically, Josh Allen's sitting in the top 5 here. He has to. He's been a top 5 pass rusher this year. Like you said, give him the money. You got to. You don't have an option. And I think you'll get something that'll be worth it at the end of the day. He's going to keep playing at this level. You're probably getting a long contract too. Nick Bosa's was 5 years, I believe, $170 million, if I recall. So if you're looking at that, that's, a lot of money. And you're going to get something similar here. So let's say $30 million is probably where I'm sitting. I'm saying it high because, if it's less, I'll be excited. It's probably not going to be more. So same thing here. That's your signing bonus, because this added to this is $30 million. And you set your base salary each year. And you guys can do this if you want to mess around with looking at next season and contracts and all that. It is overthecap.com. So that's what we'll do. We don't mess with guaranteed salary, but you probably guarantee 2 or 3 years. So Josh Allen re-signed. Trey Herndon is a player I'd absolutely consider, but I don't think is vital, especially with the emergence of Antonio Johnson over the last few weeks, because it just adds another reason into why you don't have to necessarily pay the money. I don't think it's necessarily a waste, but you're getting a better player who's on a rookie deal for another 3 years. So re-signing Trey Herndon doesn't make a ton of sense, because at some point he's probably getting phased out of the lineup and he could start on another team. So it's worked out really well with him. Like, originally, he was not a player that people liked a whole ton, because he was the Jalen Ramsey replacement. He got a lot of crap for it, but he has developed really well in Jacksonville. He's become a solid starter. This is his best year as a player, and I hope he gets paid in free agency. I just don't think it's going to be with Jacksonville, so he's probably a guy you walk from. Now, Calvin Ridley. Here's the fun conversation. And you guys will get in on a little something here if you have not heard yet today. And this is just kind of insider stuff. It's here, I'll just read it. So PFF posted top 50 free agents for this next year. They did some contract projections, so they actually have Calvin Ridley getting franchise tagged. And one of the things they noted was a similar trade where they mentioned on here it was Leonard Williams' trade, not this year, but before, from the New York Jets to the New York Giants. And when that trade took place, there was a lot of conditions on it. And in their language, the extension did not include a 1-year deal. That was not considered an extension. And why that's important is because the Calvin Ridley trade conditions say that if Calvin Ridley receives, and originally it was reported by Ian Rappaport as a long-term extension, the draft pick goes from a third to a second. So if a long-term extension does not include 1 year, which if it's similar language would be the case, the Jaguars could choose to franchise tag him, which the number is quite a bit, $21.6 million, or they could choose to just give him a 1-year prove-it deal, which I would be a fan of. And I want to see how the rest of this year goes. I want to make sure there's progress there. But I think right now, if you have to give up a second for Calvin Ridley at this point, with how he's performed, I don't think it's the best thing for the team to do, because he has not lived up to the wide receiver 1 name. He would cost you a significant draft pick to do that. If you let him walk, you're getting the compensatory pick if you don't spend. And so that compensatory pick to a team that's going to value Calvin Ridley and say, hey, this guy's got a ton of yards still this year, he could be even better for us, and this could be a steal, is probably going to be a third-round pick again, similar to Jawan Taylor's compensatory pick. So that's what you could be looking at with Calvin Ridley. And so there's a case for letting him walk, but if there's a chance to just bring him back for a year, it doesn't change the draft capital, it's something I would absolutely consider. But you have to have like substantial evidence that you think he's going to take a step forward. And my issue right now with Calvin Ridley isn't just like the drops and the lack of like big moments. I think the only one we can really go back to other than just high volume games was against Buffalo, where he had the big catch down the sideline to run down clock. That was a big play, but it's really the only one we've had this year. I think I'm kind of losing my train of thought here. I think you have to see more out of Calvin Ridley than that to be able to extend him. And if he can't do that, I think this team's better off walking on from him. Now, what I would do if it was me, I would probably let him walk, and I'd be looking at the Bengals and asking for T. Higgins. I'd hope that he would hit free agency. And ultimately, whether he hits free agency or not, if you let Calvin Ridley walk, you're basically paying a draft pick to get T. Higgins. Here's the reasoning why. You do not get a compensatory pick if you spend in the same free agency. So if Calvin Ridley walks, gets a big contract, and then T. Higgins gets a big contract from Jacksonville, then you're still spending a pick essentially because you're giving up that third round compensatory pick. Now, if he's tagged, talking about T. Higgins, and you trade for him, probably giving up a bigger pick, but you're still giving up something. So there's a cost to doing that regardless, because with the compensatory picks, you can't spend. Because your compensation is either getting a pick because you didn't get anything in free agency, or it's getting a free agent in free agency. And they have to match up in terms of value, which is determined by money. So last year, Jacksonville got one because they didn't spend in free agency. They just got Dearness Johnson and a couple guys who didn't even make the roster. So that would probably be the route I would go right now. I'd be looking at T. Higgins. Of course, we got to see what happens. And on here, they have him, I think, as the third guy. Just kind of high still for how his season's gone. It's been a little disappointing, or fourth. They have him projected a franchise tag. I have seen a lot of rumors where Cincinnati is playing for life without him, although I don't fully understand it because I think they have the capital. I think they have the salary cap to be able to do it. So it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But that would be a player I would pursue. That's the route I would go right now because he did fantastic in college with Trevor Lawrence. You finally get that player. You know he can be a wide receiver 1. You pay him what he's worth. You're not paying that $30 million mark, but you're going to get a player who's well worth the money. And then you're looking towards the draft to get your third guy, would be the route I would go. Tyler Shatley, I think a guy who could probably retire at this point. Maybe he comes back. If he does, we're talking $1.5 million. He's getting up there, though, and he hasn't really had a whole lot of starting opportunity. other than I think against Cleveland this year. So I don't know if he continues. DeJuan Smoot, I think it's hard to give him a multi-year deal because this year he's pretty much had one big play, and that was about it so far. So we'll look at his stats on the year. 1 sack. He's had 8 pressures over 8 games. So 1 pressure a game is not good. But I think this is a player who's kind of still recovering from injury. There's a reason why he can only go in week 6. So I'd give him the benefit of the doubt this year. And he'd be a guy I would bring back on another cheap deal. I think you would probably get away giving him like $5 million. So this is basically what you were doing before with him, because you can expect him to be a better player. And he's 29. He's not a guy who's like way up there in age. So that's probably what I'd look at with him. If he breaks out late this year, I'd give him a multi-year extension. I'd want to, ideally. You just gotta be able to prove that's worth it. Now, a lot of these air contracts, really small ones. Caleb on Chason, a lot of people hate him. Some people are rooting for him. I think if they want to pay him a couple $1 million to come back, that's fine. They value him as a special teamer. If you're going to pay him to do that and then come in as an edge rusher here and there, that's fine. But, obviously he's not a player you're going to break the bank on. Since I don't know what a contract would look like for him, we'll just consider him walking. I think Brandon McManus you extend. Give him essentially the same deal, $2 million roughly. Same with Ernest Johnson, because he's been well worth it. These are 2 guys you brought in, small acquisitions, but worked out pretty well. And Tim Jones, you can tender him. You can tender Gregory Jr. And then Nathan Rourke, he won't be on the roster. He'll be on the practice squad, so I won't include him in this. Jamal Agnew, I think right now is a player who's going to have to prove his value every season, because as a kick returner, there's some years where you just don't do a whole lot, and there's some years where you do a ton. And last year, he had a huge impact. He was consistently returning kicks like 20, 30 yards in the playoffs. He was a big part of why we had a chance in both the playoff games we played. So if he goes and does that at the end of this year, that's great, and you can extend him. But if not, you do got Parker Washington, who although he's struggled a little bit with returns so far, I think he's a guy you could rely on next season and beyond. So right now, Agnew's kind of in a spot where he's got to earn it for next season. So here's what you're looking at. If you guys got questions, once again, just remind you, throw them out there. Doesn't even have to be related to specifically this. We're generally talking off season. It's more of a discussion than anything else, ideally. But you're sitting here with $34 million in cap. Now, the draft capital would be probably about $10 million. It's what it is on average. This was a larger number before, because the cap was expected to be much higher than what it is here. Unfortunately, the cap projections are not going to be as high as expected. So there's going to be less spending money. So what you have for free agency is probably around $25 million that you can spend safely. And so I think you look to get a couple big additions so that you can go into the draft and you can focus on a few positions that you know there will be prospects available for, and you just move around to wherever the value is. Like, you might not have a player fall to your pick, but you might move up, say, 15 spots, and now there's a guy there who shouldn't have been there, and you go select them. So you can kind of move around to make your needs line up with where you're selecting, but you just got to be proactive about that. And this is a team that does a lot of trading, so I think you could definitely see that. Now, guys I would look to add, just to give you a preview of free agents, 2 guys I'd look at specifically right now. T. Higgins is first. I think that's going to be the big name. Yeah, Balky loves value. That's why you don't see a ton of trades during the draft all the time where he's moving up, because he's basically trying to make sure that he makes a trade that he literally cannot lose. Calvin Ridley trade, for example. He is probably going to give up a 3rd round pick for that, whether or not he comes back. And that's the worst case scenario if he doesn't like return to the team next year, and it's not that bad. You paid a third round pick for a guy to get 1,000 yards for you roughly. This is not terrible. The Ezra Cleveland pick that he sent off was an early 6th rounder. It was Carolina's. Like, this is what he does. He looks for value deals and he makes them, but you don't get an absolute ton of them. So, like last year, people like moving up in the draft, so he traded back, got a lot of deals out of that. That's just kind of what he does. And okay, does this work only if we let Ridley walk? What is this specifically? Like being able to add these players? If that's what you mean, Ridley next year, I imagine he gets a 1-year deal. You're probably looking around 15 to 20 million. So if they re-signed him, like you're probably not going after a Higgins because you don't want to pay 3 players a ton of money. And you would probably be looking to restructure a few guys ideally. Because if you sign like Higgins or another receiver, your first year cap hit's pretty small. So if that's what you mean, that's what I'd say about that. So we'll look at what contracts could look like here. So T. Higgins, if that's the receiver you go after. And if you look on the list of guys available, it's the obvious one here. And you're going to see a lot of people talking about it. You got him. You have Michael Pittman, which would be a solid one, but I think he gets franchise tagged, like they say. I don't think he hits the market. He's their number 1 receiver. They need to keep talent around Anthony Richardson. Mike Evans, I don't know if he walks. And I think even if he wanted to walk, he'd get traded on a franchise tag ideally. But they're probably going to keep him around. That's a guy who should be a Buccaneer for life. Trades and move up in the draft. Okay. Yeah, so if you let Ridley walk, you have your 2nd in that case instead of your 3rd. So you have more flexibility in how far up you can trade. We'll actually take a look at that here in a second after we show what these contracts could look like. We'll do actually a quick mock draft just to give you guys an idea of what it could look like. But if you keep your 2nd, you could probably move up into the early teens in the draft. And sometimes you get better deals. Like, for example, Detroit moved up from 32 to 12, and they gave up a 2nd rounder. Now, the 2nd rounder was pretty early compared to what ours is, but sometimes you get those deals, and that was a divisional rival. But Mike Evans, I don't think is a guy you're going to get your hands on. I also don't really like him, but that's besides the point. Marquise Brown, he'd be a fun one to bring in. Not great size, but really fast receiver. He has had some injury issues, though, so I don't think that fits what you're looking for. But he should be franchise tagged. I believe he played with Kyler Murray in college, so he's a pretty good fit for them. And then after that point, you get to Calvin Ridley, and everything else is kind of a fall off from there if there's even more receivers in free agency. So you kind of see the point where you're going to get led to T. Higgins. So T. Higgins, he wanted apparently somewhere between 24 to 30 million. However, this year has not been that great so far for him. He's had injury issues and his production's fallen off a little bit. But I think with all that said, he's still going to get somewhat close to it, but probably not as much. And yeah, I would have fun with Hollywood Brown on this team. I really would. Where I would like to see him go, if I'm just picking in general in the league, I would love to see him go to Carolina. I think that would be fun. But I don't know if that happens. I think he sticks around in Arizona and they go get Marvin Harrison Jr., which would be great for him. But T. Higgins, probably looking at, I would guess, about 22 to 23 million a year based off what happens this season. His value is going to go down a little bit. Also, consider the fact that the cap is not as high as expected. So when this happened in the past, I think it was the COVID year, you saw a lot of players forced to take cheaper deals. And so this is a year where that's probably going to happen because teams were planning for this bigger hike. So it's just the way it generally works. I think Jacksonville still pays a lot, though. And if T. Higgins hits the market, which this is what we're guessing is going to happen here because we don't know if Cincinnati wants to pay all that money. And if they do, hey, give up the second rounder to go get him. I'm all for that. If it's a first, a little bit different of a conversation. But let's say he hits free agency. I think T. Higgins would choose the Jaguars over any other team if it's the same deal. And even if it's maybe slightly less. Because this is a guy who's really good friends with Travis Etienne. You can go see the jersey swap after the Monday Night Football game. He played with him in college. He was Lawrence's #1 receiver in college. These guys all know each other. They were national champions together. This is a clear and obvious fit. And if you're asking him to go somewhere, do you think he's going to choose that? Or do you think he's going to choose, say, like Carolina, where they could pay him about as much, but it's a team that's really struggled, and you got a lot of question marks with the ownership even there? I think you choose Jacksonville. So let's say $22.5 million. Probably roughly what he would get, and you'd gladly pay that. So this is your number for the signing bonus. And we fill in base salaries. Get this right. There we go. Salary cap changes by about $6 million because that signing bonus gets split up over all the seasons. That's what's great about signing bonuses. You don't have to worry about what your normal APY value is for the salary cap that year because it's $22.5 million here. Salary cap still changes by $6 million. So you bring in T. Higgins. The other guy I would consider, but I think you got to think hard about, is L'Jarius Sneed. It depends on if he hits the market. But Sneed has done a really good job this year. He matched up against Stephon Diggs this last week, allowed, I think, 3 yards on like 21 of the 35 routes Stephon ran, and the other ones were other people covering him. He is a really good corner. He comes from a Super Bowl champion team. He knows what it's like to win a Super Bowl. He could play inside. He could play outside. I think he's a guy you consider if Antonio Johnson becomes a safety in the NFL. If Antonio Johnson plays the slot, doesn't make as much sense. I'd rather draft a guy as a backup. But he's someone that I would have my eyes on. In this scenario, though, we'll leave him off because you also have the question of, do you want to pay Tyson Campbell a ton of money, have L'Jarius Sneed under contract, and then extend Darius Williams and be paying, 50, 60 million to your cornerback room? That's probably not ideal. So we'll just go with T. Higgins here. So based off what we've done, you've got 28 million left here, really 18 million when you factor in the draft class. Your needs at this point, you want another receiver. You can get by if you absolutely have to, because keep in mind that Christian Kirk and Parker Washington, while they're slot receivers do move outside here and there. They spend probably 25% of their time out there. So that's a lot of snaps you could fill with those guys still, and then you can move out, say, Evan Ingram outside. Maybe Brandon Strange lines up as a tight end. So you can find ways to fill that in if you absolutely have to. Have a guy a little out of position, or maybe you just go pick up someone who's pretty affordable. For example, what if McCole Hardman's sitting out there? You get players like that really don't cost a ton for the team. So receiver, we'd like to get an outside receiver. We're looking at a center. You would like to get a guard if you can. You would like to get a tackle as well, if possible. You don't have to, but a swing tackle would be good. And on the defensive side of the ball, you need interior defensive linemen. You can argue that you would need an edge rusher, although I think you could afford signing someone, stay close to the season, and then you probably want to look at getting an outside corner. So those would be the positions that we would be looking at in this draft. And we won't necessarily get all of them, but we'll do our best at getting them. So now that you keep your second round pick, I want to show you guys kind of what we'd look at for where Jacksonville could trade up to. So we'll keep this on what they normally run with. We'll enter the draft. Now, keep in mind, we do not have all these picks. This does not factor in any pick going to Atlanta. Reason why is because it's not official yet. Calvin Ridley is going to hit the marks to cost a 3rd round pick unless he gets injured literally this weekend. The reason why is because he has to play 60% of the snaps. He has played about 85 to 90% of the snaps on the season. So he's so far above that even if he gets injured, it has to be like immediately. And obviously we're not going to root for that. So he's going to cost us a 3rd. And we're not keeping him in this scenario. And you're going out and signing T. Higgins. So you're not getting a comp pick out of it because you signed T. And essentially you gave up a 5th and a 3rd to have 1 season of Calvin Ridley. So kind of worst case scenario, but you know, the way the trade's set up, it's built for that. So what you're giving up is pick 90. It's 96 the compensatory pick. This is Jacksonville's 3rd rounder. This is going to Atlanta. We have to force the trade because it wants you to send picks for both. So we'll force that. And then we're going to start the draft. Now, teams I would look at to be picking wide receivers, because this is probably what we're looking at 1st round, it's either that or offensive lineman. And I think you can get an offensive lineman in the 2nd round, because you're going to have guys available most likely, like a Cedric Van Pran or a Jackson Powers Johnson. Even if you move your 2nd round pick to move up, I think the 3rd round you could still consider. You're going to have 2 4th round picks to work with if you need to move for a guy. And there's a lot of picks this season. There's a deep roster. You don't need to bring home 7 guys. You can consolidate your draft. So you're probably looking at, in this scenario, realistically, Chicago would move back. They're not going to here. But they'd probably move back. You're seeing 2 quarterbacks. You're seeing Marvin Harrison Jr. come off the board. So that's your 1st receiver. You have Odunze, Neighbors, and Coleman. If you bring in Higgins, you're probably looking at Odunze or Neighbors, because Coleman's going to have a very similar skill set to what T. Higgins does. And you want to have a little bit of diversity in what you can throw at a defense. So if you got to get him, you can, but I'd rather keep the pick and wait for your selection, because I think you can get a really good receiver then too. Teams that could take one, Washington's probably going defensive line. Chicago could definitely consider taking a receiver. They could also go offensive line. Raiders are going quarterback probably. Could go wide receiver, but not really a need. Jets are going to be offensive line. Giants could be receiver. Titans could be receiver. There's talk about the Chargers going receiver, although I don't think they would do that because that would require them to admit they screwed up last year. And it is too prideful of an organization, despite the fact they have nothing to be prideful of. And then perhaps Atlanta and New Orleans could consider one. Although I think they could look more at a guy like Emeka Egbuka, which a lot of Jacksonville fans like, apparently based on the poll I put out this week about what receiver you'd like to take in the 1st round. But Emeka Egbuka is a slot guy. You're not worrying too much if he goes off the board. So we'll go ahead and start. We'll kind of watch what comes off here. So there goes Neighbors and Odunze. So Jets elect to take receiver. Giants go with receiver 2. If they had gone past pick 12, this is where you're looking to move up. So if you're trading up here, say with Seattle, this will get the trade done. 58% chance means you give up just a little more. If you're moving up in this range, ideally you'd like to get back a day 3 pick, and you'd like to get a player of value there. So for example, another one I did with this, Chris Abrams-Drain was available in the 4th round, and I got a 4th round pick back, and you go get a guy like that. We saw Antonio Johnson last year. So you can get a valuable player still at a later pick, so it's possible you even get something in return. But in this scenario, we're not going to trade up. Not really much of a reason to, so we'll move to our pick. You could also consider moving up for a guy like Jared Verse if he was on the board. I think he'd be a really good pick, although maybe not the biggest need out of everything. And you even see in this scenario, like if the Bengals let T. Higgins walk, Keon Coleman's probably a guy they're going to go with. That's probably where you're looking at him coming off the board. So these are some of the players you can look at. As far as non-receiver options, Graham Barden is probably one of your top options. He's a fantastic offensive lineman. We talked about him earlier in the show. He's a guy that can play anywhere that you need him to play, and he has experience at center from, I believe, 2020 was what we saw. And so he's a guy you could bring back as a center on this team and just tell him to go maul dudes. And you're going to have a completely different mentality on the interior. So he's one guy you could consider. You could go get a safety really high in the Cameron Kitchens. Newbin would be my top guy, although he does go off the board here. I think he will fall, though. Just the nature of the safety position would say that. You saw Branch last year go at 45, which was insanity. Leonard Taylor would be a really good interior defensive lineman, although really the production is not lined up for him yet, which is the big problem. A lot of potential there, but you're kind of getting a raw prospect. If you want to go corner, Kalen King was a guy who was top 5 at the start of the year. Kind of fell off this year, struggled with Marvin Harrison Jr. That kind of killed his stock, because there's the question of can he go up against those corners. He just kind of lost confidence after that game. And you got some other names you could throw out. A lot of people like Terrion Arnold, JT Tuimoloau. You also look at Troy Fautanu. The guy I would consider here, it would have either been Brian Thomas or Troy Franklin. Troy Franklin's really low on PFF's board. The thing I'm watching with Franklin, to give you an idea where I have him, he is a top 20 prospect for me, 17. Franklin is 187 pounds, 6'3". You essentially got your Zay Jones replacement with T. Higgins. You get your jump ball receiver, your deep threat, right? You're looking for the Calvin Ridley replacement. The way I look at Troy Franklin, actually, let me go over here, because this is NCAA. Troy Franklin is essentially all the things that you wish Calvin Ridley was. That's the way I look at him. It's about the same size, got a little more height. Calvin Ridley, if we look at him on here, I believe he is 6'1", 190. Yep. Franklin, super fast receiver. Someone who has consistently put on weight as well. That's a very important thing to consider in this, because that's the big knock against him. If you're 187 coming into the league, you're probably going to struggle. One of the only players to get past that was Devonta Smith. Not a whole lot of guys who are small like that, although he's a lot smaller compared to what Troy Franklin is. Franklin last year, entering college, was 174. He went up to 187 this year. This is a guy I'm watching because say if he goes to the Senior Bowl in a month, or if he goes to the Combine, which he'll be at the Combine, if he's weighing, say, 195, he's got his weight up. He bulks up. And we saw this with Zay Flowers last year. Not the same kind of prospect necessarily, but the guys who don't have a ton of weight on them, Zay Flowers put on 13 pounds of muscle. If Franklin comes to the Combine, does something like that, all of a sudden he's a stronger receiver, and he puts up numbers like you expected at the Combine, this is someone who should enter the conversation with Odunze, Neighbors, and Coleman. And right now, I don't have him that far behind Coleman. Franklin is a fantastic route runner. Is one of the biggest things you'll be able to tell with him. He has a great deep tree of routes available to him. He has a huge frame. Obviously, we're talking about a 6'3" guy. His arms are absurdly long. This is a guy who's really good at the catch point, comes down with a lot of stuff. He plays more physical than what his size is, and he is an extremely fast receiver. He'll be one of the fastest guys in this class. And so a lot of these things you'll notice when we heard about Calvin Ridley and what he brings to the Jaguars, it's similar stuff. He brings speed, he brings the route running, he brings a really good frame. I think Franklin just is going to show these things more than what Ridley did due to just not being in the league for a while. And he's going to have more upside. This is the guy who should go in the first round. And so if you can see him put on a little more size, these weaknesses go away. Because he's going to have his frame filled out. He's not going to get shoved around as much. He's going to be a better blocker. He's going to have more power to do that. And he's going to do better with contested catches. He'll be a better boundary receiver. So Franklin is 100% a guy I'm looking at. In this scenario, he's the guy we're going to take first in this draft. Mention some other names you could go after. Brian Thomas, another really good receiver. Really tall guy. I think he's got an inch on Franklin, but a lot more built out. It's like 205. One of the best deep threat receivers. Had, I think, one of the highest contested catch rates down the field. Just incredible with that. But he was the number 2 on his offense because he played with Malik Neighbors. So kind of hard for him to get up in the first round right now, although I think he'll sneak in by the end of the day. Xavier Leggett's another guy people really like. Very similar build to Deebo Samuel. Not that he's going to be that exactly, but that's kind of what you see when you look at him as a prospect. We'll go Franklin here. We'll make sure first. Okay, we got an offer from the Dolphins. We will take this offer and take a pick from them because you've got Detroit picking. I don't think they go receiver. Same with the Eagles. Same with Miami. So we'll offer that. And you got your wide receiver still. So make a little move like Jacksonville did last year. So we'll get Franklin. Kind of start moving through this a little faster. So you got your second round pick. So you're looking at offensive line at this point. That's a pretty clear need. You need your center. You're going to have some options available here. Now, one guy you saw go off the board just now would have been a nice pick. Patrick Paul. He's a pretty good tackle. I do have some big issues with him, but I think he's someone that you could develop for a year and have start. That'd be phenomenal. He has issues with his leverage. He does not get low enough at times. He's a guy who struggled a little bit in run blocking as well, but phenomenal build. Someone you could look at in the second round if we're going to talk about the tackle route. But here, looking at this board, there's no one weird who's really fallen that would be sneaky here. This would be Jackson Powers Johnson. So you go get your center, get a guy who graded out incredible this year, be a really good fit for this offense, fits what you want, gets you stronger, gets you a little more weight. I think he's got 13 pounds on Fortner, which is a ton. So we'll pick him up. And we'll just kind of roll through this. I don't know if we'll do the whole thing. We'll kind of wrap up around here. So we'll come up, trade 90 away. Get Sturdivant with that. Okay, now we're on the board. So you got a few options here. Don't know if Cedric Van Pran's off the board, I believe. He would be another guy I would consider. He's the other center prospect. He go really early, it looks like. Yeah, I think so. Let me make sure. Oh, he's here. Okay. So, for Cedric Van Pran, I think he's a center. With Jackson Powers Johnson, he's a guy who can play anywhere on the interior. I believe he also played at right guard when he originally came in. We'll confirm that here. I think it would have been 2021. Yep, see some snaps at guard. He's a guy who could absolutely project out there. And so if you have this opportunity here, I would honestly go after Van Pran at this point. One of these guys is going to be your guard to the future. I think it's probably Jackson Powers Johnson. You have competition on the interior. You have a really good backup. If you got to swing out Ezra Cleveland, you double up at that position, which is what I mentioned earlier on this, is 100% an option for Jacksonville. And now you're probably looking at considering the defensive side of the ball a little more. So, top option here, I would probably go with Tyleik Williams. I think I've got him around 40 or so. 48. I've got him as a pretty good fit. He's a smaller build for a defensive lineman, but he moves really well. He's surprisingly powerful for that size. Has really good grades. He's a guy who's going to kind of shock quarterbacks with how fast he can move from that spot. He does struggle with a little bit with his height. His build's not necessarily the greatest, and he does need a little bit of development, but I think he's kind of a sneaky pick you can get in on this team and gives you another guy to rotate on the interior. He's a guy I would consider there. Michael Hall Jr. is the other guy. He does have worse problems, though, with size. And I think at that point you get a little scared of that. And so we'll go with Tyleek here. We'll get some defensive interior help. And then we'll see what's on the board for this other 4th round pick. And probably call it there on this draft. So, Cooper Beebe, still on the board. This is something you could see during the draft, although I think he should go way earlier than this. He's just a guy, he's a good football player. But he's not going to blow people out of the water. Chris Abrams-Drain, I think would be a fantastic fit. You get a guy, not the greatest size, but he's played phenomenal on the outside for Mizzou, been one of the best outside corners in college football. You put him on this team behind Darius Williams, another corner who plays outside that maybe doesn't have the best size, even worse at 5'9". But you get him training behind him. I think this is a fantastic backup for the outside, and you're feeling really good about that. And those are the picks I'd make early on in the draft. So we will just kind of try to fly through the rest of that. You guys got any questions before we wrap this up? This is kind of where we're going to end this. As well, if you want to check out this big board, this will update over time, but this is available. It is in the stream. It's the pinned link above. If you look in the chat, there's no cost to it or anything. I'm not a professional at all, so I'm not going to do anything like that. But that is available to you guys if you want to check that out. I'll actually fly through this just so we get grades for it all, which I'm going to ignore some of them. But I'd probably go James Williams here. Get yourself a safety. Javon Foster's a really good tackle. You're hitting your last needs on the team. At this point, you could take an edge rusher, but you've kind of hit everything you need to, and you've drafted a lot of best player available still. So guys I have high on my board, I think would fit into that. We got 3 selections left here. Jasheen Davis, really good pass rusher. I think should be going probably 3rd round in this draft. I would love to bring him on this team. The first time I turned on film for him was basically me turning on the TV to watch one of his games, and he immediately forced a fumble and recovered it, and I think even returned it for a touchdown. So he set a pretty good first impression with me when I started watching the film on him. At this point, you know, you're so deep in the draft, there's not exactly a whole lot of people that you're going to know or love. There's some prospects that aren't on PFF either, so we'll just fly through these. Just kind of pick random guys up. These won't matter as much. We're almost done here. Speed it up. We'll go edge rusher out of Washington. And there we go. You'll probably see an F on this first one. That's what it gives me every time I go with Franklin. Yeah. It hates that pick a lot. Absolutely hates it. But Franklin should be a first-round prospect, and there's a lot of people who would agree with that. He's a very good wide receiver. The only concern is about his size, specifically the match of his height and weight percentile. He's the only receiver to succeed around that size. Was Robbie Chosen, or Chosen Anderson, or whatever the heck his name is. He was good for a little bit, kind of phased out. But Franklin's going to be bigger than this by the time he comes to the NFL. I truly believe that. He has consistently put on weight, and it has not impacted his play negatively at all. In fact, he just has best season ever and set about every record you could at wide receiver for Oregon. So I think he'd be a fantastic fit in this offense to get your Ridley replacement. You get your center, you get your guard, flip those around. That's probably the positions they'll play the second year. You get your interior defensive line help, corner, safety, tackle, edge. You're just hitting everything you can, drafting best player available. this is a really deep class. It's going to be a lot of great players. But you can kind of see one of the ways this could work out. Now, if Odunze's sitting there, if Neighbors is sitting there and we're in the teens, I think this is a great opportunity for the team to go trade up. And if you got to give up that second round pick, as you can see here, you can get another center in the third round. There will be someone there. Maybe it's a Zach Frazier instead. That's still a really good center. It's just the nature of this. Players fall. You can still get good picks, and you got to take advantage of the ones who fall, and hopefully that happens on draft day. And it has happened before. Saw with Christian Gonzalez last year. Went super late in the draft. Think like 17. And then even Joey Porter Jr. Really good corners that should not have been available where they went. Same with safety as well. I mean, Antonio Johnson in the 5th round was about as dumb as it gets, but that's what the NFL did. So that'll absolutely happen. But I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. We'll stream a little bit more closer to the end of the season. Hopefully the season goes on for a while and this team can figure it out. But right now it's not looking as great. I think if they can get Baltimore this Sunday, really all they need, I think, to somehow pull off the first seed, it's not a lot. You look at Baltimore and Miami's schedule, both those teams have really hard matchups. Baltimore plays us, they play the 49ers, they play the Dolphins, and they play the Pittsburgh Steelers, who they lost to this year. And Miami, on the other hand, they play the Jets, the Cowboys, the Ravens, and they play the Bills. So both of those teams I think are losing to. I really do think that. And if Jacksonville can beat Baltimore, knock them out in one of those games, 49ers beat them, maybe KC drops the game, we got a shot. And I hope we have a shot, because if we do, I'll be able to go down for a later game and hopefully make the Senior Bowl. And that'll be a lot more fun, but otherwise we'll be at the wild card game. So I appreciate y'all joining. Thank you, man, for the comment. I really appreciate that. Sorry there has not been a whole lot this year, especially during the football season. A lot of the focus of this channel is on the team building aspect rather than breaking down games, because it's just not something I can offer a ton to, and we want to offer something a little different. So I wanted to give you guys information, kind of inform you. You guys make your own decisions on things and make your own opinions, but that's our goal here. And I appreciate having you all here to talk to. It's fun. It's fun to talk to Air Jags fans. I love my trips down to Jacksonville. Best time I have of the year for sure. So thank you all for coming in here. I hope you have a great rest of your night. And that's all I got to say. Finally, go Jags.